When someone asks me the impossible question, who's your favorite composer? I always want to start by answering, well, whoever I'm working on at the moment, apart from, of course, Mozart. For me, Mozart's music contains every aspect of being human, yet despite its unplumbable depths of profundity, it is always instantly appealing and accessible to everyone. This concert features two of his masterpieces, the Sinfonia Concertante and the Requiem. The Sinfonia Concertante is a kind of double concerto for violin and viola, in these performances played by our concertmaster Adelya Nartadjieva and our principal violist Yun-Ting Kuo. In 1779, Mozart had been working for the Archbishop of Salzburg in his hometown for some time, and was getting rather fed up with the restrictions placed on the type of music he could compose. During his childhood, he had toured Europe extensively with his father and little sister Nannerl, delighting the public with his keyboard skills and his ability to improvise brilliantly on any melody the audience threw at him. Although these years of travel were exhausting, they had allowed him to hear a wide range of musical styles from many different countries. He was bursting with ideas for concertos, symphonies, and all sorts of music prohibited by the Archbishop. He put some of these ideas into the Sinfonia Concertante, which, as the title suggests, is a combination of symphony and concerto. Not long after its composition, the Archbishop fired him for neglecting his duties as court organist in order to compose, and Mozart left Salzburg for the much more cosmopolitan Vienna, where he lived for the remainder of his short life. The piece begins with a sense of grandeur, and we know instantly that we are in for something substantial. For many listeners, the Sinfonia Concertante is the greatest of Mozart's violin concertos, with the added element of conversation between the two soloists. The addition of the deeper sound of the viola adds depth to the sonority, and Mozart exploits every colour available to him in the orchestra. The first movement is fast and virtuosic, requiring great skill from the soloists, bursting with energy and life. The second movement is one of Mozart's rare minor key movements. When Mozart writes in a minor key, we always know something special is going to happen. This movement has a plaintive and archaic quality, reflecting Mozart's new interest in early music. It's heartbreakingly poignant, perhaps reflecting Mozart's grief at his mother's recent death. We're also in the world of opera, of which Mozart was the greatest composer of all time. Having two soloists allows the composer to indulge in an interpersonal drama, as the violin and viola embellish and comment on each other's melodies. In complete contrast, the finale is joyful, fizzing along exuberantly, almost seeming to laugh. No one expresses sheer delight in living quite like Mozart, and the work ends in effortless ebullience. The remainder of the concert strikes a different tone, as we enter one of Western music's most storied and beloved masterpieces, Mozart's Requiem. The circumstances surrounding the composition of the Requiem are legend. The traditional story goes that in 1791, Mozart, already aware that he was dying, was visited by an anonymous visitor with a commission for a requiem, the mass said or sung for the dead in the church. Mozart was convinced that he was writing the Requiem for his own funeral and began to compose frantically, knowing his time was short. He only completed the first few movements, however, even too ill to write them down himself, dictating some of the music to his student, Süssmayr. As the work progresses, the music turns into sketches and then mere scraps of paper, often of the barest bones, with Mozart dying before its completion. Left in poverty due to Mozart's wild spending habits, his wife, Constanze, desperate for the money from the commission, asked Süssmayr to complete the Requiem in secret, which he did. Süssmayr delivered the completed manuscript to the anonymous commissioner, who was in fact working for a Count Franz von Walsegg, an aristocrat who planned to pass the piece off as his own composition for a Requiem service to commemorate the first anniversary of the death of his wife, Anna, at the age of 20 on the 14th of February, 1791. This led to the Süssmayr completion entering the repertoire for decades, and it's this version that most people know today. Despite Süssmayer's valiant attempt to finish Mozart's composition, his completion is full of problems. Some of the movements are entirely his own creation, bearing no relation to anything Mozart wrote or indeed Mozart's style, and his compositional gifts are simply not at Mozart's level. This leads to wildly variable quality between movements. In addition, Süssmayer made many mistakes in completing the movements that Mozart had himself composed, and we find glaring errors of voice leading, unorthodox choices of instrumentation, and poor judgment on nearly every page. This has led to a slew of completed versions by other musicologists. But the problem is with these that the public knows and loves the Süssmayer version already and doesn't know who composed what in a performance. There hasn't been another piece in classical music about which more ink has been spilled. And reading through the documents to discover who wrote what, separating tradition and myth from truth, is a massive and daunting task. Enter Robert León, a brilliant pianist and scholar who lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts. León is a Mozart expert who has made brilliant recordings of the piano concertos, a scrupulous detective, and a much finer composer than Mozart's student Süssmayer. León's version attempts to preserve those parts of Süssmayer's completion that have come to be loved by the public, while fixing their technical and stylistic errors. In the case of the movements that Mozart simply didn't write, he composes new music based on scraps of material left by Mozart that Süssmayer ignored, or reuses music that Mozart did compose. He also completes the structure of the piece by composing movements that give the Requiem the order and balance expected in an 18th century Requiem Mass. Dazzling in its scrupulousness, his completion is the best of both worlds, and it is this version that we will use in these performances. So what about the music? Well, given the subject matter, much of the Requiem is written in minor keys, which I said earlier results in some of Mozart's most haunting music. Mozart creates an archaic atmosphere by basing the main theme of the introduction, which returns throughout the whole Requiem, on Handel's piece, The Ways of Zion Do Mourn. Movements such as the Dies Irae, which describes the day of judgment when the world will be turned to ashes, are absolutely terrifying in their intensity. Using a quartet of soloists, a chorus, and a relatively large orchestra, Mozart paints an unforgettable picture of the end of time, the grandeur and glory of God, but also God's grace and love in delicate and beautiful depictions of souls passing into heaven. As infinite and implacable as a slab of granite, the music seems to come from beyond time, and I know of no other piece that lodges in your head and refuses to leave you alone in quite the same way. For believer and unbeliever alike, the Requiem provides a space in which to ponder life's deepest questions, framed by some of the greatest music ever composed.